So in this video, we're going to look at tools and how you find the right tools to support you. Right? Sometimes you have to write tools. You have to write your own tools. Sometimes I've written my own tool for observing screenshots and taking them for me automatically. And I did that partly because I had a gap in my process and partly because I wanted to learn how to use JavaScript better and how to create Chrome extensions. So there was multiple facets there all combining into one area. If I didn't know how to code, I would have just gone and found a tool. I might have used one of the tools I already have, because I have tools that take screenshots. I have tools that I use Snagit, I use Cloud App. Both of those tools will take screenshots. There are other plugins that I could have that would take screenshots in a browser. I would have found tools that I could have plugged into my workflow, but I had secondary gains, secondary things I also wanted to do. Now we have the issue that there are always going to be lots of tools in the same space, right? And the tool that I've written, you could use an exploratory testing extension in Chrome that has a little icon here and a drop down and lets you save bugs and defects and capture screenshots, and that might be the best thing for you and your workflow. You could use a Rapid Reporter. That's a little toolbar, comes up on your window, you type in details, you save logs. That might be the perfect thing for your exploratory testing. I've written old tools in the past that do logging. When I'm doing my exploratory testing now, I tend to just use text files, and I tend to write down the timestamps and write down what I'm thinking, write down what I'm doing, write down the files for screenshots, and do it all interactively and completely on an ad hoc basis, because that works well for me, and I'm thinking onto the page and I don't want any other tools controlling my flow. So it really depends what your process is. Whatever tool you pick has to fit into your process. So the way that I find tools now is I have to understand what process I have. Now when I'm doing exploratory testing, my meta model for how I do testing is I look for tools and approaches that will help me do modeling, observation, interrogation, manipulation. So if I'm testing a web application, I need to be able to model that. And some tools that will help me do that automatically are proxy tools. If I feed all my HTTP traffic through a proxy tool, it will show me a hierarchy of all the requests in the domain. That can help me model the structure and layout of it. I may need to model in a graph tool, just as a drawing, the flows over the site. That's another model, it's separate. I might use tools for that. I might just use pen and paper for that. I have other tools that I can use for drawing diagrams. If I'm doing observation, I want to observe the HTTP traffic. I can do that in the Dev Tools in the Network tab. I can do that by feeding through the proxy. At some point I'm going to want to interrogate, which means going back to it afterwards and looking at it in more detail. I find a proxy is better for that. And at some point I'm going to manipulate. So I might want to resend the request with different values. Proxy tool again is the best tool that I use for that, but I can do that in the Dev Tools now for some requests. So I've got multiple approaches for doing it based on the meta model that I have for my process. So you need to really identify what meta model you have, how you describe and think about your process to find tools that fit into that. Because ideally, what we want are tools that augment our process rather than forcing us to work with the way that the tool wants. Right? Previously, when we were using test management tools, we had to work the way the tool wanted. We had to create the right cross-references, otherwise it wouldn't give us the reports that we used. We had to report the way the tool wanted because there were canned reports. We don't want to get in the position where the tool is controlling us, because then we're bought into the tool. We can't change our process. We can't become more efficient. We can't become more effective unless the tool becomes more efficient and effective first. We want tools that augment us. So when I'm looking for tools, very often I'll look for tools that I can augment, that I can script. If I've got a choice between two tools and they do exactly the same thing, I'm going to pick the one that I can script. When I was looking for mind mapping tools, I picked FreePlane, which is a version of FreeMind, because I can do groovy scripts in there. And I often write extracting scripts. There's one that I've got on GitHub which extracts a mind map into a markdown format, and I use that for generating reports all the time. I augment the tools. But again, I need programming skills in order to do that. If I didn't have the programming skills, I'd have to find a tool that met my needs, and that can be a little bit harder. But given the choice, I look for tools that I can augment, because then I can learn how to augment them. And it's possibly just a couple of lines that need adding in order to make that tool work for me. I learned how to do JavaScript in the console so that I can augment a lot of the applications just with little JavaScript and export JSON just to the console and then copy it into something else. When I'm doing my exploratory testing, I've got to the point now where I don't use any big tools to support that. I just use text files, and I write everything in Markdown so that it's there in text, and that works fine for me, and we can version control it and it works for other people. But if someone wants a special report in PDF and it looks nice, I can feed the Markdown through something like Pandoc and generate a PDF file. I find a combination of tools that do one job really well that I can use in combination. Now, I've written loads of tools in the past. I've got like 82 repositories on GitHub. Things that I've needed at one point in time and things that I don't need now, and they're kind of out of date. So what I thought we'd do is, just to summarize a bit, go meta onto this process. I'm not going to give you a list of tools. I don't build a list of tools anymore. I used to maintain a list of tools. I'd have lists, I've had mind map links to tools categorized in terms of their functionality, and then I would be looking for excuses to use that tool. I haven't evaluated this tool yet. I'd look for an excuse to evaluate that tool. I'd spend a lot of time building lists of tools, evaluating tools, but not actually using them. It's really important that we spend more of our time doing the work than finding tools to help us do the work. Otherwise, you end up becoming a team of people who just look for tools and then recommend tools to other people. And your entire approach to blogging or news out there is, here's a new tool, rather than here's a way of doing things. Focus on the doing things. One of the traps is to find the best tool, the biggest tool, the one true tool to do everything. Don't look for that. It doesn't exist, and if it did exist, it would suck you into its way of working. You want the tools to work as utilities for you. I don't build a list of tools anymore. What I do is, I've got my meta model, so I know where things fit in. I've learned how to search well. I've learned how to use Google to search for different terms, and I do it faster. And I figure out what search terms I want to use. So other search tips are, if you do a search for a list of things, every list that you get back will be out of date, but it might be a good start point, and the tools might meet your immediate needs. So it might be a useful thing to do, but we can't rely on other people's lists. We have to get good at doing the searching. First thing I look for, if I've got a need that I need to meet, is I'll look to see, are there any built-in operating system tools that I can use? That way, I don't have to install them. They're there all the time. They're going to be updated with the operating system, so they're not going to be out of date. We can build them in combination. So if you've got tools at the operating system, you can write command line scripts around them, or you can use Automator to plug them on top. And they'll probably have help files built in, and people will know how to use them. Also learn how to search for the places that you're likely to find those tools. Right? Google is not a tool search engine, so we have to learn how to use effective search terms to do that. But if you go to a niche group, like a Slack forum for testing, and they've got a tools forum, if you can search in there, that's going to be a much more niche search area that is restricted, and you may be more likely to find some of the tools that you're looking for there. If you do search for particular niche, blog, then the tools, it will look through all the blogs that may have mentioned tools that people have used with experience reports. We have to get better at narrowing down the search and better at searching. If you want an open source tool, don't just search the web for open source tool. Go to where open source tools live on GitHub or Bitbucket and use searches there, or GitLab. Use searches on the places where those tools live in order to find them better. Sometimes we have to get in the head of the person who has made the tool to figure out how have they marketed this tool to then find it, because they may be thinking about their tool with a different audience in mind than us. We're using certain terms to search for it, but maybe it's a tool that's marketed at security professionals for doing recon. Maybe that's the kind of search terms we need to use in order to find the tools. But that kind of comes down to your meta model for how you work and how you are categorizing your tools. Now, once you have a meta model, like mine's modeling, observation, interrogation, manipulation, and then on top of that there's reflection, because I'm trying to think about how all these things piece together. But if I'm looking for tooling, It's going to be, is it something that helps me model? Is it something that helps me observe? Is it something that helps me interrogate? Is it something that helps me manipulate? They're my general categories. So I will look for them in those categories. I'll look for particular ways. That means that I know what gaps I am trying to solve, so that when I come to the point of I have found a tool, I don't have to spend a lot of time evaluating it. Right? People go through very often long evaluation processes for tools. We don't want that. We want something that will work. Now, part of the question there is this a tactical tool or is it a strategic tool? A strategic tool that is going to be used by more people, that maybe cost more money, may have to have a longer evaluation period. But consider, if it's a strategic tool, have you tried to do something tactical first? Because your tactical approach allows you to experiment, which can then feed into making decisions about which of these tools that we're tactically using and are actually working will we think about as our strategic way forward. So I try not to evaluate. What I try to do is use and experiment tools to see if they fit the gap that I have identified in my process. Then when I do find tools and I've got a choice of tools, I have to think, right, can I actually combine these tools or do they sit in isolation? When I'm working with videos, I use Fmpeg a lot for compressing the tools, pulling out chunks, extracting out the audio. And that's a command line tool. So I can wrap it in command line scripts or Automator on the Mac to do things a little bit easier for me. It doesn't have to come with a GUI. There are other ways of adding GUIs on it to make tools more useful for the specific niche process that I want to use. I look for tools that I can augment. So does this tool store it in a binary format that is hard to parse, or does this tool store it in a text format that I can parse and build on top of? I will pick the tool that stores in a text format. I will pick the tool that has an API. I will pick the tool that lets me add in plugins and write my own plugins. Even if I don't know how to do that yet, if I've got a choice between tools, I'll pick the one that is flexible, because I want tools and utilities that are focused rather than frameworks that I have to work within or funnels that take me through a particular workflow. I want to piece that together because I'm in control of my workflow, because that has to be flexible for the environment that I'm working in. I also look for tools, I have a preference for tools that make it easy for me to work. So I'll look for cross-platform tools in preference to other tools, because I work between Mac and Windows and I don't want to have to find a different tool on each platform. Sometimes that means it will be a cloud-based tool, because then it's platform agnostic. I like tools that sometimes sit on the operating system but store the files automatically to the cloud, because then it's accessible on my mobile device as well. So I'll use Evernote because it automatically syncs. I like Cloud App as a screenshot capture tool because it saves it up into the cloud and it's easy to reference or share these things, or save movies or animated GIFs. Find a combination of different tools. Then, when we do have to make a choice, consider, do you actually have to make a choice? Because each of the tools is going to do some things well, better than the other one. Maybe you can use them both. Maybe you use them based on the thing that they're good at that time. When it comes to proxies, I use Zap, Burp Suite, Charles, Fiddler, depending on what I'm doing and which platform I'm on. Now that means I have to learn a little bit more about how each of the tools work. But I can also use them in combination. So I don't just have to use Burp. I can have Burp feed into Zap, and I can use both of them and harness them both at the same time. So don't get in the thing of we have to use one tool and pick it. You can use multiple ones, right? But I don't build a tool list anymore. I use tools because they've met whatever needs I have. When I have a gap in my process, first of all, I see whether I've got anything there already that will fit that gap. Does the tool, can I augment it with something simple? But what I don't want to do is spend a lot of time building a tool unless there's a secondary gain for me. And that's usually a personal thing. At work, when we're actually on projects, building a tool because we want to learn something may not be the best thing to do unless you've got something like 20% time where your aim is to learn things. What you should be focusing on is the business value, finding a tool that works immediately and plugging it in and doing whatever technology gap you have to do to bridge them together rather than building your own stuff. So don't seek out to start writing new frameworks or new tools to do things when you have a small gap that could be plugged with a simple utility. Right, so that's my advice for that. I don't build a tool list. I look for little tools that can augment it. Hopefully there's something in there that can help, but we have to get good at searching things out. And to do that, we have to understand our model of how we test and what we're trying to achieve.